Hey there, how's it going everyone? Welcome back to Freddy or Not, where my name is Freddy and I am ready to dive into today's topic, which is if the Scooby Gang would be able to solve the Kira case from Death Note. So like and subscribe, because today we're going over all the information available to find out. In this scenario, the Scooby Gang, also known as Mystery Incorporated, will be completely replacing L, so that means the world-famous detective does not exist, and instead it is Scooby and the gang who will be tackling the case from the beginning. The win conditions for the gang will be the same as the conditions for L. They have to convict Light and prove he is Kira, and they lose if they convict him without evidence, kill Light without proving that he is Kira, or if Light kills himself before they can prove he is Kira. And of course, if they die at the hands of Light, obviously. So this hypothetical would begin the same way the story of Death Note began, with a high school student named Light Yagami noticing a black notebook called the Death Note outside his classroom window. Light then grabs the Death Note, a notebook which can kill with only a name and a face, and tests it out on the Shinjuku killer that was holding people hostage. After this, Light will soon accept a new ideology that the world is in need of change, and that he will bring said change by becoming the god of the new world through the killing of criminals, and become the serial killer known as Kira. Soon, people catch on to the fact that someone is delivering judgment to criminals, and conspiracy theories will spread online. The international police, also known as Interpol, start to suspect something is up, and it is at this point that the super detective L would organize the police in an effort to catch Kira. But in this timeline, that never happens. Instead of L joining the fray, it's Mystery Inc. that hops on the scene. Seeing as how there were message boards about Kira hailing him as a god, it wouldn't be a stretch to assume that the gang from Coolsville will see this as an opportunity to catch a serial killing supernatural entity and decide to take on the case. The first question is, how would Mystery Inc. go about catching Kira? Now, L was kind of a psycho. He was willing to go to any lengths to catch Kira. He was even described as being slightly evil in the How to Read volume. He was also willing to sacrifice Lind L. Taylor in an effort to test his theories and provoke Kira in a contest of pride. Mystery Inc., however, will be doing nothing of the sort. First of all, it's pretty unlikely they will have the same resources as L, so they won't be sacrificing death row inmates on live broadcasts. No, they're more likely to take a boots-on-the-ground approach, which will actually probably end up working to their advantage. L's pride caused the game of cat and mouse, which led to Light working harder to conceal his activities and deceive the police. But if he's unaware of any investigation even occurring, his guard will be more lax. The Mystery Gang, like L, will likely head to Japan, since L, before even the Lind L. Taylor murder, already knew Kira was in Japan. And if you're wondering how the Scooby Gang is going to arrive at the same conclusion, because let's face it, most of the members of the gang are not the brightest tools in the shed, you should keep in mind that most is not all. Velma is a certifiable genius, and as strange as it might be to hear, potentially even more of a genius than L. L's an insane prodigy and considered one of the smartest people on Earth, and when he was only 8 years old, he prevented World War III. Mello also claims his abilities are that of 5 ordinary investigative bureaus and 7 intelligence agencies put together. On top of that, it's said that he gets smarter the older he gets. Realistically, this is going to be very hard to beat, but Velma's intelligence is not realistic in the slightest. Velma is considered one of the greatest detectives in the world renowned for her genius. And you have to keep in mind that the Scooby-Doo world is not like ours. Theirs is a world with characters from DC Comics. And Mystery Inc. are the people Batman calls to help him on a case he can't solve. That's already crazy enough. And then when Wonder Woman needed a female detective, Batman recommended Velma, implying he considers her to be the world's smartest female detective. And when Talia al Ghul needed help to find her kidnapped father, and she didn't want to deal with Batman, she hunted down Velma to get her help, making it seem that Talia al Ghul, daughter of Ra's al Ghul, one of Batman's smartest enemies with a worldwide information network, considers Velma to be the second best option after Batman. The kicker on this one though is Tim Drake, who's considered the best detective out of the Robins, and who Batman claims has detective skills that even rivals his own. But when Batman saw Velma's detective prowess, he was ready to make her the new Robin. In other words, he saw Velma's detective abilities and was willing to drop Tim Drake on the spot to have her as Robin instead. I think it's been made pretty clear here that Velma, at the very least, is consistently portrayed as rivaling Batman's detective ability. But what does that really mean? I just like you to keep in mind just how ludicrous Batman is. Batman is the guy who's able to outsmart Brainiac, a 12th level intellect that's smarter than all of humanity combined. Meaning that while L is like rivaling multiple bureaus, Velma is rivaling a guy who can exceed humanity. So, strange as it might seem, Miss Velma Dinkley is more than qualified to find out Light is in Japan. Especially since realistically, it's not even that hard to figure out, since he killed the Shinjuku killer, which was only broadcast in Japan. That doesn't mean this is a one-sided stomp of Velma carrying the team to victory though, because unlike L, Mystery Inc. is far more vulnerable. They really don't use an alias or anything, so at any point, Light could realistically just walk up to the members of the gang and just be like, "Hey, what are your last names?" And they would be cooked, especially if they haven't figured out the stakes yet. Now, normally, that's what would happen if someone was pursuing Kira, but the big difference here is that Mystery Inc. will just fly to Japan and start their investigation. They won't announce they're coming for him, they will just do it. Now, it should be stated, if we take Scooby-Doo from a point in their timeline where they're world famous, they get clapped frame 1. So we'll be taking them from pretty early on, probably from the days of their classic adventures. This is because there's a big difference between Light seeing them and saying, "Hey, did that dog just talk?" and him seeing them and saying, "Is that Scooby effing Doo?" As for how the investigation would go, well, from the Shinjuku killer only being broadcast in Japan, they would already know he was there. And like L, they would probably start their investigation in Kanto, which is the most populous region of Japan. Also, Light was pretty sloppy with his killings in the early days, killing criminals only in the hours after school, and this is something Velma would absolutely notice. Throw in the fact that all the criminals were killed on broadcast, and yet the ones without their face shown was spared, it gives a pretty good starting point, with the gang immediately on the prowl for an intelligent high school student in the Kanto region of Japan who has the ability to kill people that he at the very least knows the names and faces of. So far, the gang would be encroaching on Kira, but they wouldn't really be able to put a finger on him. But when the Japanese police force caught on to the fact that Kira was killing criminals, they wanted to censor information, and with L not around, they're likely gonna do it. At this, Kira is either gonna start killing innocent people, or just continue business as usual due to his access to the police database. But if this scenario plays out, the gang will have narrowed it down to an intelligent high school student with access to secure police records. And as the show presents at this point, there are only 3 real suspects: Detective Kitamura's daughter, and of course Light Yagami and his sister. And if 2 of the suspects are under the same roof, that's probably where the gang is going to start their investigation. And if you want to believe that Light wouldn't use the police records, there are still ways they could catch on to Light. For starters, Light walks around just talking to Ryuk, and Scooby-Doo, as a dog, is noted for having exceptional hearing.
Just think, Scooby, no ghostly voice will get past your keen sense of hearing.
And even that predicates that Light has his guard up around Scooby. It's very likely that Light will just yap to Ryuk, even though Scooby's right next to him, because you gotta keep in mind, he has no clue the dog can talk, and probably wouldn't think twice about it. All this without mentioning the possibility that the gang can probably see Ryuk, as on numerous occasions, the gang have been shown to be able to see ghosts, souls, demons, all manners of supernatural entities, so it's extremely likely they'll just pull up to campus and off-rip see a giant monster following a student around. The only evidence against them even being able to do that is that they weren't able to see Deadman in one issue of Scooby-Doo Team Up, but in that very same issue, they're able to see numerous other ghosts, so it really is like 100 pieces of evidence that they can see ghosts versus one comic issue in which they can't, that is also contradicted in that same issue. So it is more likely than not that Light is cooked frame 1. But even discounting that possibility for a second, I do think the odds are stacked in their favor that they'll at least narrow down the options this far. And if they start tailing Light, you know they're gonna send Scooby and Shaggy for that job. And once again, Scooby's canine hearing will probably come in clutch. But if Light does find out he's being followed, he's likely gonna target Shaggy. He won't think of going after a dog, why would he? Which would be devastating if Shaggy used his real name. Even if he confronts him, I don't see a world in which Shaggy, even if he gives up his last name Rogers, will ever identify himself as Norville.
And that's Norville Rogers.
It's Shaggy! Like nobody calls me Norval!
Kira would end up being followed by the one member of the gang that uses an alias. But even this only happens if you ignore Mystery Inc.'s usual mode of operation: breaking and entering. They wouldn't sit around for evidence, they would break into Light's house. They break into people's house and investigate literally daily. It is their MO.
Guys, do you realize how many laws we've technically broken investigating mysteries? Trespassing, interfering with a crime scene, corrupting evidence, dressing up a dog as a waitress? Although, granted, that's just on the books in Idaho.
And if they do that and Freddy goes to investigate the bedroom, there is a 0% chance he is fooled by Light's drawer trick. We're talking about a trapping aficionado who's outsmarted the greatest trapsters on Earth, a man who can identify complex series of traps immediately just by looking at seemingly normal objects. And if Freddy gets his hands on the book, it's over for Light, because at that point, they will trap him. And the Death Note alone should be enough to prove his guilt. It was found in his house, it's covered in his fingerprints, and has the names written of every criminal who has been killed. Light's dad especially would be willing to believe them, even if the evidence goes against his own son, since Soichiro is like the one good guy in the show, and what he cares most of all is justice. If someone other than Freddy finds the drawer, however, the book is likely burnt. And while no killings would continue, they would have failed in apprehending Kira. That being said, I know what you might be thinking. I'm probably underestimating Light here. What happens if Mystery Inc. doesn't narrow down the suspects? Well, surprisingly, things will actually get worse for Light if that happens, because at that point, Misa Amane will join the fray, and anyone who has seen Death Note is likely aware that Misa is more of a liability than anything else. When Misa joins the scene, Mystery Inc. will be able to get to her with no difficulty. I mean, she was almost caught by the regular police, and she left so much evidence against her. I can see a scenario where they send someone like Daphne to buddy up to her, and Daphne is just going to put the evidence together, and Daphne, who's a black belt if you remember, will easily be able to apprehend Misa. And when the gang gets their hands on a Death Note, the situation's going to get pretty ugly for Kira. And Kira won't be able to use his latch-dish plan as using the Death Note hidden in his watch, because Scooby, as a Great Dane, runs at 30 miles per hour and has the bite strength to rip off arms. There is no world in which he gets away with that. His hand is getting bit. The final point I want to mention here is that even if you give Kira the benefit of the doubt and he manages to kill every member of the gang, even Shaggy, who goes by an alias, he would never be able to kill Scooby-Doo. The first rule of the Death Note specifically states, "The human whose name is written in this note shall die." And Scooby is not a human. He is immune to the Death Note. If the situation happens that the gang dies at Kira's hands, he will now have a superhuman talking dog hunting him, and there is nothing he can do about it. Even if he tries to shoot Scooby, Scooby has survived getting hit with a fireball that blew up a shack. There really isn't anything Light can do to him. And if Velma did the groundwork and narrowed down the suspects, it will only be a matter of time before Scooby ends Kira's reign of terror once and for all. I mean, Scooby has solved entire mysteries on his own, because, side note, every member of the gang except Daphne has done that, like even Scrappy. So Scooby will more than likely be able to catch Kira. This scenario is definitely more possible if they go up against a late game Kira who has fake Death Notes and convoluted plans, but all that would really do is buy Kira time, because Scooby will not stop until he catches him. In the end, Mystery Inc. is more than well equipped enough to catch Kira, especially when he was starting out and was more than a little clumsy. Best case scenario, they catch Kira before he even knew he was being pursued. Worst case scenario, Kira kills every member of the gang before eventually being caught by Scooby. The final points I want to address here is Velma not believing in monsters, which likely means she wouldn't think of a supernatural answer. But while it's true she doesn't believe, every single time the gang has confronted supernatural entities, she accepts the situation immediately and continues like normal, only to later gaslight herself into denying what happened. So if she was pursuing Kira, she would first catch him, and then attribute the whole case to some delirium caused by sleep deprivation or something. Finally, the gang have been known to work for the police, so if they ever really get stumped, they can likely join the task force, which will allow them to narrow it down to the 3 aforementioned suspects. But it will possibly expose their names to Kira, assuming they put their names in the police system, which is unlikely since they'll likely have put together the whole names and faces aspect, but it is still a possibility. Of course, even if that happens, there's a high chance Scooby clutches up, but it is still a 50-50 as to whether the book is burned during Scooby's investigation. Well, folks, that's all I got for you today. Be sure to smash that subscribe button, and I'll catch you in the next one. Peace.
It was good while it lasted. We eased each other's boredom for quite a while. Well, Freddy, it's been interesting.